Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Tuesday, March 8th. This is Africa 54.
Poland embraces more than 500,000 fleeing Ukraine as Europe faces its biggest refugee crisis since 1945. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights sounds the alarm on Ethiopia's deteriorating security situation. And on this International Women's Day, focusing global attention on gender equality, bias, stereotypes, and discrimination.
Ukrainian civilians being bombarded and besieged by Russian forces are evacuating from the war-torn country on Tuesday. Many are fleeing on buses, but others are leaving on foot amid temporary ceasefires. One evacuation saw people leaving the eastern city of Sumy, where earlier a Russian airstrike on a residential street killed at least 21 civilians, according to local authorities. A resident of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, posted images on social media showing the destruction of the streets of the city following a Russian bombardment. Streets were strewn with debris and broken glass. Shop fronts and canopies were damaged, as were the windows of the apartments above the stores. Kharkiv was one of the first cities to be targeted as part of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 2 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion on February 24th. More than half have gone to Poland. UN High Commissioner for Refugees Philip Crowther says there has not been such an exodus in Europe since World War II. The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister says there is an agreement in place for Russia to observe a temporary ceasefire and allow civilians to evacuate the eastern city of Sumy. Russia's defense ministry says additional evacuation corridors will be in place.
To safely evacuate civilians from settlements, a ceasefire is declared today, 10 a.m. Moscow time, and humanitarian corridors will be open from Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Mariupol.
Russia's defense ministry shared purported video of evacuees from Mariupol arriving in territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine on Monday. After a ceasefire was declared, Ukrainian officials are rejecting Russian plans to have many of the corridors lead evacuating Ukrainians to either Russia or Belarus. And for more on what's going on in Ukraine, on the growing refugee crisis, Henry Ridgwell reports from the town of Przemysl on the Polish-Ukraine border.
A surreal soundtrack greets the sea of humanity fleeing Ukraine, a pianist with a message of peace. A momentary distraction from the misery unleashed by Russia's invasion. More than 1 million Ukrainians have fled to Poland since the invasion, by far the highest of any country, and they have been largely embraced by their European neighbours. Most new arrivals are bused to reception centres away from the frontier. Some have family or friends in Poland where they can stay, but many have nowhere to go. They are given beds in shelters like this one, a school in the nearby town of Przemysl, now entirely given over to refugees.
It is remarkable how efficiently Poland has managed to absorb the huge number of refugees arriving over its borders so far. The question is how long that can continue as tens of thousands of refugees continue to arrive every day.
Yevgenia has just arrived here with 3 of her 4 children.
My husband is in Ukraine. They didn't let him leave. And also my older son. He's 18. He also had to sign up. So we're separated. Volunteers come to us and offer us opportunities where we can go, where there is work. We want to work, so we're not dependent on someone else, so we can be useful for something.
The school's head teacher, Malgorzata Zioba, oversees the shelter and now has hundreds of refugees under her care.
The worst moments are when, for example, a minibus arrives at night and we take in babies that are 4 or 5 months old. It's really very emotional, and I think not everybody is suited to cope with that. We could do it because we're strong. We don't know for how long. As long as we have the strength, we will help.
Next door, a cultural centre has been transformed into a temporary shelter. They have been overwhelmed with donations from local residents and businesses.
At first, they are shocked. They want to shout. They want to talk out loud what they experienced, what they went through, what their escape was like. And then slowly they calm down and get used to the new reality that they have to go on living.
The historical bonds run deep across this border. At the cathedral of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Przemysl, a prayer service was held Sunday morning for the people of Ukraine. The service was broadcast live across Poland. Many Ukrainian refugees say they hope to return home within weeks, that this dizzying upheaval will soon be over. But as they see the images of death and destruction in the land they left behind, that hope is draining away. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Przemysl, Poland.
Now, as the war in Ukraine rages here in Washington, all eyes are on the gas pump as Russian sanctions send prices to near record highs, and the administration of President Joe Biden tries to balance Americans' needs with world peace. VOA's White House correspondent Anita Powell has more.
Grim scenes as Russian troops continue their siege of Ukraine, and diplomats scramble in global capitals to stop this conflict. But at home, President Joe Biden is facing tough questions about how the stringent sanctions against Russia are affecting Americans. Gas prices have hit a near record $4 per gallon across the U.S., and Biden is under pressure from across the political spectrum to do something, though there is no consensus on what he should do, and he hasn't decided, the White House said.
Well, no decision has been made at this point by the president about a ban on importing oil from Russia. And those discussions are ongoing internally and also with our counterparts and partners in Europe and around the world.
Ukraine's president on Monday called on Biden to make that move.
Sanctions should include a boycott of Russian exports, in particular a refusal of oil and oil products from Russia. It can be called an embargo or just a moral issue when you refuse to give money to terrorists. A boycott of imports to Russia, if they don't want to respect civilized rules, they shouldn't get goods and services from civilization.
In recent weeks, the White House has quietly made the rounds to oil producers the U.S. usually keeps at arm's length, including Russia-friendly Venezuela, to discuss alternative sources of oil. White House officials have also met with Saudi and Iranian officials, and those discussions hinge on much more than oil, Psaki said.
The most important reason why we are focused and have been focused on having these discussions with the Iranians and our P5+1 partners is to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. That is why we're in these negotiations. We are getting closer. There are still important components to work through, but certainly the discussion of oil is a part of that, but the most important reason is to prevent them from acquiring a nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, along the Ukrainian-Belarusian border Monday, Russian and Ukrainian delegations met for a third round of talks that both sides said made little progress.
I'm telling you honestly that our expectations from the talks have failed, but we hope that we'll be able to make a more significant step forward next time. The talks will continue.
But in this uncertain time, one thing is unwavering: Ukrainians' resolve. Champion heavyweight boxer turned Kiev mayor Vitaly Klitschko is among those holding the line outside the capital against a Russian advance.
Every house, every street, every checkpoint, we will fight to the death if necessary. No one wants to die, but if necessary, we will protect, most of all, our children, our families.
Harsh words as this conflict stares down a third week, while the world watches. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
Turning to West Africa now, gunmen ambushed and killed at least 62 members of the volunteer vigilante Yan Sakai group in Nigeria's northwestern Kebbi state, according to Usman Sani, the head of the group and a police spokesman. It's the worst violence to hit the state since mid-January. Many northwestern states in Nigeria have groups of volunteers who help defend villages and towns from armed gangs as the security forces are stretched fighting Islamist militants. Demonstrators protested in Nairobi Tuesday over a vicious assault on a female motorist. The young woman was attacked by taxi riders known commonly as boda bodas after a traffic accident last Friday, according to police. A viral video of the daytime incident showed the men grabbing at the woman's clothing as she screamed from inside her car. About 150 protesters marched to police headquarters, chanting "Hear my scream" and waving banners calling for a halt to gender-based violence. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has ordered that all taxi riders must re-register with the transport authorities or face punishment. Police say they have arrested 16 riders in connection with the assault. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says more than 300 people have died since November in airstrikes in northern Ethiopia. David Doyle has more.
More than 300 people have been killed in airstrikes in northern Ethiopia since November, the United Nations Human Rights Chief said on Monday. Speaking at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Michelle Bachelet described a significantly deteriorated human rights and security situation. She said multiple airstrikes in Tigray and the neighbouring Afar region had apparently been carried out by the Ethiopian Air Force.
The office has recorded 304 killings and injuries to 373 people resulting from aerial bombardments during the reporting period.
Ethiopia's government has regularly denied targeting civilians in its 16-month war against forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Last year, that conflict spread to the Afar and Amhara regions.
Our office continued to receive reports of severe and wide-scale human rights violations in the context of expanding conflict in Afar and Amhara regions, as well as in Tigray.
Ethiopia's envoy to the Human Rights Council, Mahalet Hailu Gwade, dismissed Bachelet's statement, saying it differed from the facts on the ground.
The state of emergency has been lifted. Detainees and prisoners, including leading figures of the terrorist group, have been released. Ethiopia reiterates its firm commitment to address human rights violation born out of our commitment to human rights. No heinous atrocity will go unpunished in our country.
Bachelet also said her office had received reports of 306 rape incidents by Tigrayan forces in Amhara between November 1st and December 5th. TPLF spokesman Getachew Reda said he could not comment on what he described as blanket allegations.
David Doe of Reuters filed that report. We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our technology segment when Africa 54's Paul Ndiho talks to a Nigerian tech entrepreneur. Still to come, celebrating International Women's Day. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's on tap for Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa. As Russian aggression towards Ukraine plunges the world into uncertainty, we'll discuss what the situation in Eastern Europe means for Africa. What is at stake for the continent? We'll also speak to Africans caught in the conflict.
My family, friends are now in Ukraine. My mother and grandmother, they're now in Kiev, and they have been living and sleeping in bomb shelters and underground parkings for the last couple of nights.
An in-depth discussion on the war in Ukraine on the next Straight Talk Africa.
International Women's Day is being celebrated Tuesday. The aim is to focus global attention on the state of women when it comes to gender equality, bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. Its goal is to make the world more diverse, equitable, and inclusive for them. VOA's Laurel Bowman explains.
We've heard the famous quotes, "Behind every great woman is another great woman. Investing in a woman is investing in a community. When women move forward, the world moves with them." International Women's Day on March 8th invites the world to focus on where women are and where they need to go. In the United States, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation held a virtual two-day forum to highlight International Women's Day. Paloma Adams-Allen is with USAID.
Real progress has been made in recent decades, yet women and girls continue to shoulder a profoundly disproportionate burden of the impacts of today's global challenges.
There were shout-outs for women in Ukraine, whose country is under attack by Russia.
As the conflict continues to unfold, we're seeing women play a crucial role in resisting Russia's campaign of violence, responding to the urgent needs of their communities, combating disinformation, taking up arms to fight, and engaging on the diplomatic front.
Experts also noted that women around the world have carried a good bulk of the burden in responding to the global COVID-19 pandemic, as both healthcare workers and caregivers, both in the home and in the workplace.
Child care, elder care, home care, too often are inaccessible and unaffordable, while at the same time, care workers scramble to care for their own families, even as they take care of others.
Meantime, women were forced out of jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the U.S., more than 3 million women exited the labor market over the past 2 years, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, with women's participation in the workplace lower than it's been in over 30 years. And women and girls are more likely to be killed by natural disasters as the rate and severity of climate shocks increase globally, according to USAID. Advocates for women's rights would also like to see more women in top government and political roles.
We need to have more girls and women participating in civics and politics. I think even when we are almost 49% of the population, we are not equally represented in the positions of power.
Experts laud the progress women have made so far, but want to see more when it comes to gender equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
For more on International Women's Day, I'm joined live via Skype from the U.S. state of Maryland by Amira Woods. She is the Executive Director of the Green Leadership Trust. Amira, it's a big day for women around the world, but we continue to hear reports of domestic violence, economic hardship, and the COVID-19 pandemic impact. How should we celebrate this day?
Well, Esther, we celebrate with a mixed heart. First, we acknowledge all that is happening in terms of women in the midst of war, in the midst of a climate crisis, in the midst of economic pressures throughout the world. There are women who are finding ways to protect themselves, their families, their communities all around the world. These are women who are peacemakers. These are women who are environmental justice activists. These are women who are at the forefront demanding that economies work for all, not just for the few, but for all on this planet. And so what we have is a day to really, to recognize all those on whose shoulders we stand. People like Wangari Maathai, people who are at the forefront of visioning a future that is more healthy, more bright, a future of liberation for all people. But I think we also, this day, we recognize that Black, Brown, Indigenous women around this world, we are leaders. We are leaders in our community that are demanding fairness and equality, whether it is representation on the Supreme Court or in legislative bodies across the planet, or it is, having a voice for women whose communities are at the front line of the climate catastrophe, already facing rising sea levels, already facing fossil fuel companies that are literally at the fence of their homes and their neighborhoods.
Amira, so where do you see African women and African women here in diaspora as well, in terms of where they are in achieving political equality, economic stability? Where are we?
Well, we are varied, right? We have women in highest level of office, like the president of Tanzania. We have women that are members of Congress, like Ilhan Omar, and so many others that have broken those barriers and seized political power because they have been part of movements that have pushed for change. And so we have to acknowledge the presence, the dynamism of all of those women, Black, brown, indigenous women who are in key leadership roles. Women are also on boards. I'm so honored to represent the Green Leadership Trust, representing Black, brown, and indigenous people on boards of environmental organizations, basically pushing to change the power dynamics of organizations that will change what the planet looks like for the future. We are boldly visioning the future while also remembering to center care, to center justice, to center love. This is what women across the planet, Black, brown, and indigenous women in particular, are doing on a daily basis. And we hold them up today. We celebrate them and we say, go forward, continued strength. It is the entrepreneurs that are bringing particularly, innovations in climate justice. It is the activists.
All right, Amira, thank you so much. Well put, Amira. Amira Woods is the Executive Director of the Green Leadership Trust. All right. The UN says it has reached gender parity at the senior leadership level, but challenges remain, especially in the field. Women leaders are still in situations of conflict around the world. The UN Senior Women Talent, pipeline is relaunching its Time to Lead campaign, highlighting the stories of courageous women leaders and encouraging women to join peacekeeping operations at the senior level. Let's listen to women talk about the importance of their roles with the United Nations.
Conflict has two sides, and so it's important that we who are part of the United Nations have a representative role when engaging with women. We experience in conflict in South Sudan here too, lots of conflict-related sexual violence.
The mandate of the mission always talks about women, and thanks to the Security Council Resolution 1325, and we are very, very serious about looking at these things. So typically, let's say for example, we are going to do any activities, projects, even patrols, we will never do anything unless there's a woman, female perspective is into, the gender perspective is into our activities.
When you see countries in crisis, the majority of the victims, who are they? These are women, children. I think it is essential that peacekeeping operations also recruit women to be able to speak to that community.
The fact that now we have some clear targets for the percentages of staff that need to be women in the mission, that really helps managers to be able to offer to women to come and join the mission, because they know then that they will be alongside a growing number of women colleagues.
The implementation of the gender parity policy is very progressive and has supported women in the peacekeeping operations, because now we have more women joining peacekeeping operations, both as uniformed personnel and civilian personnel. We have more women in leadership, and I would like to see a 50-50 of women and men, especially in leadership positions in the UN.
That was women in leadership positions with the United Nations describing the importance of their roles. The World Health Organization has announced the establishment of a worldwide biomanufacturing training hub in South Korea to help poorer countries make their own vaccines, insulin, and cancer medicines. The hub will assist producers in Africa and beyond with the know-how to mass-produce mRNA vaccines such as those used to combat COVID-19 on a large scale and in accordance with international standards. It will also accommodate trainees from middle and low-income countries worldwide that may have difficulties obtaining immunizations and treatments that were previously only available in wealthier countries. Technical and hands-on training will be provided on the manufacturing practices required for creating such vaccines.
The aim of the hub is to provide a facility where manufacturers from low and middle income countries can receive training in how to produce certain vaccines and the licenses to do so. We believe the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub holds huge promise, not just for increasing access to vaccines against COVID-19, but also for other diseases including malaria, tuberculosis, and cancer. The WHO Academy will support these efforts by helping to develop a comprehensive curriculum on biomanufacturing.
Our climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year between 2030 and 2050, according to the World Health Organization.
Climate change is disrupting many lives around the world. The change in climatic conditions, change in weather patterns, and the increased frequency of weather-related disasters, such as floods and forest fires, are causing eco-anxiety in people. The American Psychological Association defines eco-anxiety as the chronic fear of environmental doom, and young people are experiencing the condition.
Recent statistics from Avast show that about 75% of young people are afraid of how the future is going to look like in terms of climate change. So the young people are definitely worried, and the way we continue to delay action, then we continue to also impact the mental health of these young people.
Experts say eco-anxiety is exacerbated by striking images of the adverse effects of climate change that people often find in the media. But there is more.
Young people are not anxious solely because the future is dire. They're anxious because of the inaction of their leaders, the inaction of decision makers. That's what is anxiety raising. It's not so much that there's doomsday scenario.
Wanjira Mathai is Vice President and Regional Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. She says more should be done to lessen anxiety due to climate change among the youth.
If they knew we were doing what we need to do, taking it seriously, addressing issues of climate finance, addressing adaptation, addressing loss and damage, and putting finance on the table like we did in the post-COVID recovery, they would be okay.
Meanwhile, in a new report, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that the world is only beginning to see the devastating effects of climate change. And UNICEF warns children are at risk.
Reducing emissions is the